So now we are going to move into uh, bowl bound college football with the WWCF. So we are now in week 3. There's some things starting to emerge as trends, some of them good, some of them bad. Hopefully, you can see this. Again, I'm not going to show you in the game because the game is very old, doesn't translate well to streaming, unfortunately. But WWCF is, of course, the oldest of the two bowl-bound leagues here at SimNation. I commission them both. Both have great coaches. Slight difference between the two in how prestige and other things are handled, but it's a long-standing league. Has probably some of the best simulation-minded coaches I've ever seen. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this. But if you're interested, go to wwcf.us. You can express your interest there. Of course, you can let me know here. A lot of good teams are open. We're now in the third week of the season. We just completed that. It's a 15-week regular season, conference championships in week 16, and then you have 4 weeks of postseason, which includes bowls and playoffs. Um, so kind of since the last time we talked was right before the season. Made some predictions, and I'm already wrong. So preseason number 1 was Rutgers. Uh, we'll talk about that in a moment. Um, uh, so, and I think preseason number 2 was Texas Tech. Talk about that in a moment. Currently, the number 1 is Texas, so that's John's team. Texas has had a very good beginning of the year. If you look at them, they knocked off Rutgers, so they knocked Rutgers out in number 1 position, and then they edged out Georgia Tech, which is Dave's team. So 2-0 right out of the get-go. Rutgers was kind of a shock to John, wasn't a shock to me. I actually thought Texas could take that one, and I think I called it. So they're ranked number 1. Next game is against Oklahoma. That's Greg. We'll talk about that in a moment. Maryland is number 2. They opened the season with a close win over California, which is Marcus. And then they beat Maryland and Texas Tech. Of course, Texas Tech is number 3 now. The only loss is to Maryland. Um, Game was not probably as close as I would have expected. Um, Talked about Texas Tech. Cincinnati, of course, comes in at number 4. They are their CPU team. Ohio State. This is Rob. They're off to a pretty good start to 3-0. They're one of the few teams that actually have 3. So Indiana blew them out, made it barely past Mississippi. Mississippi's a good team though, and then blew out BYU. So right off to kind of the start, I thought they would have Florida. This is Harry. Florida is off to a great start as well. They beat South Florida and then turned around and beat Ball State. Now, before anyone jumps on me about this, right? When I do week 3 scheduling, it's late at night. I'm tired. Ball State is Harry's other team, his third team. I accidentally scheduled Florida and Ball State against each other. That's on me. Harry didn't request that. He didn't put it in. I did that as I was blurry-eyed and trying to figure out how to set this up. So yeah, that's me. But anyways, he beat South Florida. South Florida is Rob, and then he beat himself. Um, that probably didn't come out right. USC, you have again. USC is, if I remember correctly, Mike Schmigo. They beat Baylor. Baylor's a story to talk about, and then they turned around and beat Michigan State, who's on CPU, but still a team to watch. Uh, Oregon comes in at number 8. You have Cal at number 9. Again, this is Marcus. He bounced back from his loss to Maryland with 2 pretty convincing wins over Penn State and Colorado State. Um, then you have Georgia, which is Max, who's off to an undefeated year so far. They beat Nebraska and then turned around and beat Boise State. Um, and then you have, I don't think Delbert is right now active at Mississippi. Rutgers is, of course, the story Miller would probably not like me to talk about right now. They're 0-2, but let's be candid. They lost to John in both weeks. LSU is John's other team. More of the story, Neville booked the same guy 2 weeks straight. Um, they lost a close, heartbreaking loss to Texas, and then they lost another close, heartbreaking loss to LSU. So John apparently has at least Rutgers' number. I don't know if the same could be said for Texas Tech because Miller does kind of run the two teams slightly different. So it's possible to beat Rutgers and not beat Texas Tech. Utah CPU, Marshall CPU. Michigan is Greg. Greg lost to Ball State. And then beat Appalachian State. Again, Ball State is okay, that makes sense. I got scared there for a moment. That I may have just found corruption. So Ball State is Harry. Harry's one of the best coaches in the league, so losing to Harry is never a bad thing. Michigan State is on CPU. Virginia Tech is again Harry. This is his ACC team. Knocked out Berto in West Virginia in week 1. Obliterated me at Baylor in week 2, and then beat me at South Carolina this week in a game that was probably closer than I thought it would be. So Virginia Tech's off to a really good start. Rice is, of course, Mike Cart, and he's off to a good start, having beat Purdue and Nevada. Alabama is Tim. Tim is also off to a good start, having beaten up both of the Washington teams. And then this is Rob, who he lost to Temple. That's probably a shock. Losing to Florida, not as big of a shock. Louisiana Lafayette bounced back with a pretty solid win. Berto is 1-1. Didn't expect him to beat Virginia Tech. Had he beaten Virginia Tech, that would have been a really statement win. LSU is already back into the rankings. Beat Marcus at Miami and then turned around and beat Merrill. So great job, John. You're actually really doing great this year so far. I just jinxed you and I apologize. Oklahoma, again, this is Greg. They're off to a fast start. We'll see what they're really made of though this coming week because they play the number 1 team in Texas in the Red River rivalry. Jacob is at Pittsburgh. He's off to a decent start. Lost to Air Force. Air Force is John's 3rd team, but beat Central Florida and beat Tulsa. So if we look across, that's your top 25. If you look across the conferences, nobody's played any conference games, so it's kind of meaningless at this time. But trend-wise, if you look at it, the Atlantic is doing pretty well. The Coastal not so well outside of Virginia Tech. If you look at the Big East, they're doing pretty well. Syracuse and Marshall leading. Rutgers, of course, is not doing so well. In the Big Ten, again, storyline though is going to be developing. Good to see Beats at 2-0. Jacob is at 2-1. And then, of course, you got Rob, who is undefeated at 3-0. Greg is at 1-1. Big 12 wise, Baylor is just not doing well. You're going to have to figure that one out. Oklahoma is doing pretty well, though undefeated. And then on the opposite side, you have undefeated teams in Rice and Texas, and then Texas Tech. And Texas Tech's only losses to Maryland, so take that with a grain of salt. Texas A&M is Max's Big 12 team, and they are at 1-2. He'll get that turned around pretty quick, though. Ball State is 1-1, and then of course you have Mike at Illinois, and then John at Air Force. They're 3-1 between them, so no real shocks there so far. Wyoming, that's Rob's third team. He's off to a good undefeated start. Before I forget, Tim is at 1-1 at Army. Lost to UNLV, but bounced back with a win over UTEP. And then, of course, in the Pac-12, if I remember correctly, there's only two coaches here. It's Marcus and Mike. Marcus is at Cal, off to 2-1. Mike, as I mentioned before, is off to an undefeated season at USC. In the Southeast, Florida is Harry, who's undefeated right now. Max is undefeated at Georgia. And then you have South Carolina, which is my third team, is 2-1. And then Tennessee, which is Greg's team, is at 1-1. Look over in the West, you got Tim off to a fast start at Alabama. John's off to a fast start at LSU. And then the only team of note here is Middle Tennessee State. That's Mike, and he's off to a good start. So season some ways going the way we kind of think. You got Maryland, Texas, Texas Tech, Georgia, Florida, the usual crowd all coming up to the top very quickly. Baylor's dropping fast, so is Rutgers. They'll both have to fix what's going on. Be careful with Rutgers, though. Again, they lost the same coach 2 weeks in a row, so take that with a grain of salt. John may have just taken all the losses to mirror with Texas Tech, and he's funneling his inner rage and managed to beat them. League leader wise, the story here really is you have a couple quarterbacks. So you have Rutland at Maryland, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he won the Heisman last year. He's not a shock. He may win it again this year at the rate he's going. He's got over 1,019 yards. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure something's right. But he's only played in 2 games, so he's averaging over 500 yards a game. The kid from South Carolina is doing pretty good. He's got over 1,600 yards in 3 games, but he's throwing interceptions left and right. So running back wise, not off to the same start we normally see at running back. Nolan's not a shock out of Texas Tech. Miller's traditionally one of the top rushing teams in the league. Jackson's not a shock at Cincinnati. He had a good year last year as well. Receiver wise, no shocks here really. Temple, UNLV. Someone asked me earlier about South Carolina and Maryland. You're not going to see them up there in terms of league leaders right now. Both those teams distribute the ball really strongly in their passing game to where you'll normally have 5 or 6 players who have 5 or 6 receptions or more, over 100 yards, multiple touchdowns. So it actually detracts versus teams like Temple and UNLV where they'll have one player who gets all the catches. Hopefully that makes sense. Too early to tell on offensive line, punting and kicking. Return wise, again, it's too early to tell. Defense, no real thing standing out right now other than this kid out of Arkansas State who's got 4 sacks already. That's pretty decent. And then, of course, you have the safety out of North Texas and the safety out of Illinois, who each have 4 interceptions so far this season. Nothing really standing out, though. So in the WWCF, it's off to a fast start. John has already taken #1 spot at Texas. It's going to be hard to hold that. He may very well do it, and he's probably thinking I'm jinxing him. But in the Big 12, they beat on each other, and it's really hard to come through the Big 12 undefeated. I think only a few teams have done it from here or there, so we'll see what comes out of there. Maryland and Virginia Tech are emerging as the early leaders in the ACC. That was a conference where we thought we could have 2. It looks like Virginia Tech's back, which is good. And then you have the Pac-12, where again Cal and USC are headed direction, and the SEC is very tightly lumped again. So that's going to be it for WWCF today. By the time we talk next time, we'll be in week 6 or in week 7. Really, it'll be about time where you can start to make some actual forecasts and predictions around who's going to be the players to watch and so forth. But good job so far. Some of the teams are off to a fast start. Probably the coach of the week is John. He's just got Air Force humming. He's got LSU humming, and he's got Texas humming. Of course, #1 team. So great job, Bill. So if you'd like, stick around for the GDCFL. Well, there's some interesting things going on GDCFL because we're in transfer season, and I'll talk about that. But I'm gonna switch the recording over here real quick. Just give me 1 second.